Yay.
Yay, we're recording. Da-na-na-na.
Pause. And we're back.
And we're back. Ba, ba, ba.
And we're pausing again.
Welcome to Women Rabbis Talk podcast, not podcast, live stream. Women Rabbis Talk live stream. Welcome.
Woohoo!
We are back studying together as we started a few weeks ago, and we're so happy to be able to share it with all of you. And if you're loving it, please like our page because if we can get our followers up, then we can live stream direct to Facebook and or direct to YouTube. Yep, and that would be great. So, join us. Yay! How you doing,
Yay.
Marci?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm ready for some Marmur.
Ready for some armor? Yeah, we just celebrated Thanksgiving here in the grand old USA, and
You sure did.
it was wonderful. And I'm grateful for Michael Marmur and his wisdom.
Me too.
And I'm
Me too.
grateful for you.
I'm grateful for you and the insight that we bring to this text together. And yeah, it's been giving me a lot to think about these past few weeks. So I'm excited to see where it takes us this week.
Yay. Well, I'm going to share my screen for our folks who are studying along with us. And we'll be able to start reading more about this crunchy and smooth theology.
I love that. And I'm now craving peanut butter. So
Right?
thanks for that, Farmer. But yeah, all right. Continuing on with the introduction, theology crunchy and smooth. Shall I read?
Please do.
What is a Jewish theology? Beyond substantive debates between Jewish theologians, Jewish theology itself is a contested category. Some reject it as a clumsy contradiction in terms, arguing that theology has its roots in classical Greece, grew strong in the soil of Christianity, and is fundamentally foreign to Judaism. Oh, I don't think I've ever heard that. Have you ever heard that, Marcy?
No, never heard that.
Weird. Okay. I definitely don't agree. Shai Cherry has summarized the ambivalent role afforded to theology in Jewish tradition, noting rabbinic religiosity did not foreground theology. No single theology was universally accepted when Jews did begin writing theology. Theology as a discrete discipline was not a distinct category for Jews until modernity, and the gap between studying traditional texts and writing Jewish theology has still not been bridged. Huh.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about that either. I feel like, I mean, maybe this is just because we're like living it all the time, but to me, Jewish theology feels so rich and available for those who are looking to deepen into it.
Yeah, and I feel like even the early rabbinic texts, even if they don't distinctly say what their theology is in such terms, that they still are expressing a basic belief about God.
Absolutely. And I think we can, and I've certainly seen examples of this being done, look at different Jewish texts from different time periods and being able to say, this text is presenting a particular theology that is different for this group of people or in this age than other moments, other Jewish theological expressions. And so those texts that may not be the intention of those texts, but we certainly can look at those texts and identify what the theology of the writers is.
Yeah, exactly. Um, with my adult Bet Mitzvah class, we have been reading Finding God by Sansino and Syme,
Right.
and it
Great book.
has like 13 or 14 different chapters that lay out theologies, including on these ancient texts like the Torah, like rabbinic texts, moving through the modern day. And it really does seem to lay out, what these texts have to say and believe about God and how God functions in the world, if God functions in the world. What does each say about God and evil? Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting question.
Hmm. Okay, well, let's see where he goes with this. Throughout Jewish history, an insistent voice of suspicion and opposition has been raised in response to attempts to explain Jewish practice and harmonize Jewish belief. During the Middle Ages, a debate raged between Jewish thinkers concerning the intelligibility and explicability of the mitzvot, the commandments which Jews are enjoined to observe. Maimonides was firmly ensconced in the rationalist camp, convinced that each of the commandments has a rational basis. In his guide to the perplexed, he describes the opposing camp. There is a group of human beings who consider it a grievous thing that causes should be given for any law. What would please them most is that the intellect would not find meaning for the commandments and prohibitions. Okay.
So he's arguing that any mitzvah has some kind of explanation that we can discern. Is that what he's saying?
I'm rereading it. I think so. Each of the commandments has a rational basis, right? And he goes through and talks through what the rational basis for each mitzvah is as he understands it,
Mm-hmm.
or each category sometimes of mitzvah. Um, okay, which also we could agree or not agree with, but I think that is what he was doing and what he's talking about here. Okay, I'll keep going.
Please do.
But Maimonides' ridicule notwithstanding, opposition to the quest for intelligible reasons for the commandments has a venerable pedigree in Judaism. If Maimonides took the extreme position that the logic behind every commandment could be adduced, contrary voices held that none of them could, since all were shrouded in an impenetrable divine mystery.
Ooh.
He definitely had, there were definitely oppositions to his way of looking at things. While Maimonides was in favor of offering explanations for the commandments, he opposed proposing positive descriptions of God. Such an activity was derided by him and others for being impossible and futile. The usual categories of physical description are inadequate to the task. Trivial, speculation about the divine is less serious than hardcore study of the Talmud. Arrogant, it would take God to understand God. Or dangerous, speculation can serve as a gateway to doubt. Okay. This anti-theological position suggests that the quest for understanding undermines the mystery and unconditional imperative which are at the heart of Judaism. To explicate one's deepest belief is, so this argument goes, to domesticate them and thus weaken their hold. A characteristically robust objection to theological speculation was offered by Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, the Kotzker Rebbe. Heschel quotes him as saying, "A God whom any Tom, Dick, and Harry could comprehend, I would not believe
Oh, I love that.
it." It is such a good, I love Heschel. So part of what, when we teach theology and we teach Maimonides, for me, I often teach Maimonides' practice of negative theology, right? This idea that like we actually can't say or shouldn't say what we think we know about God because we can't know for sure anything about God. And so Maimonides' suggestion was that we phrase our God talk in the negative, in what we don't know, like, or what we don't think, like we don't think as a body. We don't believe there is more than one God, right? As opposed to saying we believe God is ... which we're not so sure about. So this kind of aligns with that, what Marmur's talking about here, this idea that part of what Maimonides was saying is that like if we try too hard to understand God, we actually end up distilling God in a way that doesn't feel good to him.
Right.
I'm not sure
yeah.
I'm not sure I agree, but it seems like that's what he's saying.
Yeah. That the minute we try to grasp what we do know about God, or we try to articulate it in some way, we've shrunken God. We've made God more accessible, yes, but also somehow not the fullness of what God is.
Right, because we have to put God into our own language and experience. Like we only know what it is to be human. So the closest that we can do to understanding God is to equate God to human characteristics and maybe like some idea of like the expansion of them, or God is more of these things than us. But that's really all we know, right? We only know our own experience.
Right.
So we have to sort of humanize God in order to explore what God is. And that does distill God. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess it's a question of whether or not we think that that is worth, like, brings us closer to God or doesn't.
Right. And a bit of trivia, of course, is that Maimonides' 13 attributes of God are explained and enumerated in song form in the Yigdal song that's often sung at the end of services, if people are familiar with that.
Wouldn't be us if we weren't singing. Okay. Should we keep going?
Yeah,
Would you like to read?
I would love to. While Maimonides' view that the commandments are intelligible could be seen as theological, there is another strand of anti theological thinking within modern Judaism which recruits Maimonides to its ranks. The argument proposed by thinkers as different in their approach as Yeshayahu Leibowitz and Emmanuel Levinas is in essence this: Judaism is a religion of action, antithetical to the notion of abstracted theorizing about one's personal belief. Judaism is a religion of action. Yeah.
Which is, when people talk about why is Judaism different than other religions, this is often something that gets brought up, right? That we focus on action and not on dogma, like on the doing and not the believing. And I think what I often say when that's brought up is, while that's true overall, or true in terms of like our general focus, it doesn't mean that we don't also talk about belief and that we don't also have dogma. We definitely do, right? And for some people, that's the part of Judaism that they most resonate with. So, I think it is important not to lose sight of that, and of the fact that when it comes down to it, all of our doing, like if we're talking about mitzvot, right? All of the things that we are obligated or encouraged to do as Jews, if we like peel back the layers, comes back to a theology of we do these things because we believe in a God who commanded us and obligated us to do these things.
Right, sure. Yeah, the fact that there's mitzvah implies a mitzvah, somebody who commanded them.
Right. So even though we may not talk about it that way, or we may not, especially in like progressive liberal Jewish spaces, we might not lean into the do it because God says so thing version of Judaism. And we might talk about what are the other meaningful reasons for doing mitzvot. We still can't get away from the fact that that is where the idea of mitzvot comes from, nor would I want to, right? So.
And yet, this is also why you can have a very good observant Jew who's also an atheist, or who is agnostic, somehow, doubting the nature of God, and still be, fulfilling the mitzvot and participating in active Jewish life, because there isn't this like belief litmus test in our tradition.
But there is a doing litmus test.
There is a doing, exactly.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Maimonides' emphasis on the life of action was important for the Lithuanian French Levinas, as it was for the Latvian Israeli Leibowitz. Hence, Levinas's claim that we know since Maimonides that all that is said of God in Judaism signifies through human praxis, And Leibowitz's assertion that emunah, faith, right, is not a system of opinions predicated on other prior opinion, but a mental quality, like all mental qualities as held by Maimonides, is acquired from a person's experience in day-to-day praxis. So again, it's action that's most important here.
Right.
God is found through action.
Yeah, faith expressed through action, belief expressed through action. But still, they're not saying that the belief or the faith isn't there. It's just it manifests through the praxis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Anti-theological arguments include the claim that Jewish theology is not authentically Jewish or not authentic theology, that it is to be replaced by engagement with halachic observance or with responses to a great ethical imperative. These positions, however, are not devoid of theological suppositions of their own. Those whose religious life is predicated on the axiom that God's commandments are to be followed categorically with the minimum of speculation may keep their theological speculation brief. But a just do it theology is a theology nonetheless. Avowedly secular and certainly post-secular understandings of Judaism can similarly be said to have Jewish theology woven into them.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that really is what it comes down to, is saying believing in anything about what Judaism says, especially about the mitzvot, is still a theology. You're still saying God just wants us to do the mitzvot. Such objections notwithstanding, Jewish theology in one form or another has long been part of Jewish life and literature. Rationalists have pondered God's essence, existence, authority, will, and agency. Mystics have described creative processes playing out within God. In a minimalist reading, Jewish theology means committed Jews engaged in sustained reflection about God. According to this approach, anything which is not clearly engaged Jewish God talk is something other than Jewish theology, namely philosophy, intellectual history, sociology, politics, current affairs, and the like.
Right. All of which are also, woven into our sacred texts. That when we talk about, what kind of a book is the Torah, or the Talmud, right? All of these things, there are parts where it feels like theology. There are parts where it feels like philosophy. There's parts that are historical. There's parts that are,
Yep.
So, so I think that's part of the nature of Jewish text is not necessarily to be, or at least our ancient Jewish texts, to not be one of these things, but to be all of these things. And perhaps that's why it feels complicated to tease the theology out from the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah, though there's plenty of overlap. Yeah.
So much overlap.
Yeah. So it's hard to say this is strictly theology.
Right. Well, right. And I think even when we look at more contemporary Jewish theological stuff, like your Sonsino book, right? It's still looking at all of these other things, right? Like theology as we understand it through the history in our texts and through the relationships in our texts and through the mitzvot in our texts, right? So it's very difficult to talk about Jewish theology separately from these other things.
Right. I mean, Buber comes to mind in his own need to respond to the Holocaust as part of his theology. So you can't escape current affairs,
right,
as you're wrestling with God.
Right.
How about I do one more paragraph? At the other extreme, there is a maximalist position predicated on the assumption that, in a sense, everything is theological. The maximalist argues that Jewish theology is not to be seen exclusively as Jewish God talk, but rather as discourse regarding matters of ultimate concern from a Jewish perspective. Theology is seen as an engagement with all that matters. God is not just another topic, a circumscribed object of inquiry, examined like an artifact, To speak and think about God is to relate to God's demands and God's world, not simply to ponder abstruse notions of God's essence. The maximalist position enables a much looser employment of the term theology.
Yeah.
I
And
think
I
I
guess
resonate more with that.
me too. I think that I was just going to say, I think that that to me feels more like, certainly at least in contemporary Judaism, the way that we explore theology is in this maximalist way, looking at it in connection. We don't do a lot of like just talking about what is God, or like what is the nature of God separate from these things.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's part of, for folks who are saying that, that kind of theological quest feels less Jewish.
Right.
Because I think we don't focus on that as much.
It's true.
All right. 9 centuries ago, Anselm of Canterbury offered a definition of theology as precise as it is concise. Fides, I'm going to probably butcher this Latin, sorry to any Latin speakers. Fides querens intellectum, maybe that was okay. Faith seeking understanding. The term faith often provokes an uneasy response in Jewish circles. Emmanuel Levinas's understanding of a story he heard from Hannah Arendt is instructive here. The Christians attach great importance to what they call faith, mystery, sacrament. Here is an anecdote on that subject. Hannah Arendt told the following story on French radio. When she was a child in her native Königsberg, one day she said to the rabbi who was teaching her religion, I have lost my faith. And the rabbi responded, who's asking you for it? The response was typical. What matters is not faith, but doing. Doing, which means moral behavior, of course, but also the performance of ritual. What the rabbi meant was doing good is the act of belief itself. Just sort of what we were saying earlier.
Yeah, coming back to that. And it implies belief. You're doing it because you have some belief about God within Judaism that's
Right.
telling you that this is why you do it.
Right. And I suppose you could argue, maybe it's not theology then, but I think, like you were saying, some people do these things because of a belief in the power of doing them for their own sake, or we believe in each other, and the imperative to take care of each other. That there's, but you kind of have to believe in something to be motivated to do.
Right. Like Mordecai Kaplan is going to focus less on God, but more on, of course, Judaism as a civilization. And so therefore, if we're part of a civilization, we have these rituals that link us. And so you're doing it. What's the belief? It's for this peoplehood that we have.
Okay. In Anselm's formation, it is faith that inquires after itself in search of understanding. Perhaps then a more recognizably Jewish version of the theology would be less about the search of faith for understanding and more about a praxis in search of meaning. Faith, like the Israeli aphorism about hope quoted above, is not seen here as something one feels or acquires. It is something we do. In an important essay on her decision to live as a Reformed Jew, Martha Nussbaum quotes with approval Moses Mendelssohn's observation in Jerusalem, where he says, among all the prescriptions and ordinances of the moral law, there is not a single one which says you shall believe or not believe. They all say you shall do or not do. Faith is not commanded, for it accepts no other commands than those that come to it by way of conviction.
Right.
That's interesting though, because if we look at the 10 commandments, and the first commandment, I am your God, right? And the second commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. Like those seem like they are commanding faith.
Yeah.
But neither of those commandments is about action.
Right. I am your God just means you have to recognize me as your God.
Yeah, you have to believe in me and you can't believe in anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure how he comes to this idea that faith isn't commanded, for it accepts no other commands than those that come by way of conviction. I don't know. I don't know,
Hmm.
but we'll keep going. If you are watching and you have thoughts about this,
Yeah, please.
okay. So the statement is liable to mislead. To deny articles of faith, maybe Marmur's going to talk about this. Let's see. To deny articles of faith, such as the resurrection of the dead or the divine providence of the Torah, is to forfeit a place in the world to come according to the Mishnah. Right? So you have to have, like the Mishnah says, you have to have faith. It is commanded. However, this and other rabbinic teachings are, however, this and other rabbinic teachings are understood, it would be disingenuous to suggest that questions of believing have been ignored throughout Jewish history.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, Jews from the earliest times have conceived of these questions differently from their Christian counterparts. And attempts to squeeze Jewish theology into Christian categories usually yields unsatisfactory results. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. My candidates for the quintessential moments of Jewish theology are described in the book of Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. They are not characterized by faith examining itself, but rather by a parent challenged by their child to provide an explanation for their behavior. Interesting.
Mm.
Consider 4 variations on this theme. Okay, so the first one is the Exodus text from Exodus 12:26 to 27. Should your children say to you, "What do you mean by this rite?" You shall say, "It is the Passover sacrifice to Adonai, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, but saved our houses." And then from Exodus 13:14, should your child ask you in a time to come, "What is this?" You shall reply, "It was with a mighty hand that the Eternal brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage." So, okay, great. Those are both from Passover or Passover texts. When the next one is from Deuteronomy 6:20 to 25. When in time to come, your children ask you, "What mean the decrees, laws, and rules that Adonai our God has enjoined upon you?" You shall say to your children, "We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Adonai freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Adonai wrought before our eyes marvelous and destructive signs and portents in Egypt against Pharaoh and all his household. And Adonai freed us from there, that God might take us and give us the land that God had promised to our ancestors. Then Adonai commanded us to observe all these laws, to revere Adonai our God for our lasting good and for our survival, as is now the case. It will be therefore to our merit before Adonai our God to observe faithfully this whole instruction as God has commanded us. And then the next one is the text from Joshua, chapter 4, verse 6. This shall serve as a symbol among you in time to come. Should your children ask, "What is the meaning of these stones for you?" You shall tell them, "The waters of the Jordan were cut off because of the ark of the Eternal's covenant. When it passed through the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And so these stones shall serve as a memorial for all time."
Hmm.
Okay. So we have these different examples of what to say to our children when they ask about certain rituals, practices, places,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the answers include some element of a theological, like of a God. There's God in all of the answers, or a reference to God in all of the answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
The justification is based on something that God observably did for us.
right, our relationship with God, our history of the things that God has done for us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep going.
Sure. Over the centuries, this question of meaning has often been asked by normative children of all ages, well schooled in the languages and rituals of their ancestors. But there have been times in Jewish history, none more than in the modern period, when the question has been posed by individuals situated at the periphery of Jewish life, more acquainted with intellectual and cultural trends in the non Jewish society they inhabit, yet motivated for some reason to turn again to something Jewish, sometimes little more than an amorphous sense of identity, and to ask that most resonant of Jewish theological questions: what is this? Both for the acculturated and for the alienated, the passage of time and the shift between generations leaves space for a question of meaning. What do these stones, these commandments, this in general, mean to you? It is hard not to discern the shadow of another question here. Does your understanding of what Jews do satisfy me?
Mm.
Can I adopt it without demurral, or must I search for an understanding of my own? Jewish theology has been greatly enriched by responses to questions from insiders and outsiders in all the gradations between those extremes. The moment described in these biblical passages combines the question, what does this mean to you, with the corollary, what must it mean for me? Yes.
Yeah, wow. And so much of, I've totally lost my place, but that's fine. So much of the way Jewish theology evolves over time has to do with this idea that in different generations, the previous explanations weren't sufficient, or yeah, didn't kind of weren't enough maybe um, to hold people through what they were experiencing in their generation.
Yes.
And so, we've seen the way that Jewish theology, shifts and sort of weaves a little bit around our own experience, right? Like if you think about, generations where we believed really strongly in the doctrine of resurrection, um, because we really needed, we were going through the kind of suffering where we really needed to believe that there would be, something redeeming
Sure.
for this life that we would get to be a part of in our own bodies as our own selves. And in other generations, that has felt less compelling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's certain elements of our theology that sort of come and go in different generations because we're trying to answer this question. Does the theology of the previous generation compel us to continue as Jews or not, right?
Yeah. And I found, coming back to the book Finding God, for example, that, and I by no means am saying that people who are atheists or agnostics don't know what they're talking about. I'm sure they have well thought out belief systems about why they've come to that decision. But I do also know of some who, when they say they don't believe in God, they only really know that they don't believe in the God of the Torah or the Bible.
Right.
They don't know that there are thousands of years of other theologies in Judaism, where we've responded to current events, contemporary events at the time, where we've wrestled with other bigger questions or just different questions. And those images or visions of what God is or can be are way, like you're saying, way more compelling to people than the simplistic ones from, the earliest times within Judaism.
Sure. And even biblical theology isn't consistent.
That's true too.
Different parts of Torah portray God in very different ways or bring out different sides of God that lead, to different ways of relating to God and different kinds of understandings about God. So, yeah, it's, when I teach theology, to conversion students or, in a Judaism 101 kind of setting.
Mm-hmm.
But, I talk about that Jewish theology is a sandbox and
Hmm.
that there's boundaries, right? There are things that don't change from generation to generation that are clear in the Torah and consistent all the way through. Like there is one God, like we believe in God. There is one God. That God cares about us, right? Like there are boundaries. And then um, and then within the sandbox, there's all this other stuff that we get to play with, all these other thinkers over all the different Jewish generations thinking about God. And we get to say, ooh, I like that. I don't love that. And we can kind of play in the sandbox and figure out what it is that we believe within the boundaries.
Yeah, great. That's such a great image.
I love the Jewish sandbox. The fun place. All right.
You want to go?
Sure. Um, are we at various attempts? Is that where we
We
are?
are at theology
Theology.
as articulated.
Theology, as articulated by Jews seeking understanding for their Jewish commitments, faces the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. It is sparked by a future challenge to a present commitment imbued with a historical consciousness. In each of the biblical examples cited above, the response is not purely descriptive. If I am asked, what is the combination of foliage and fruit that you are shaking in all directions during this festival of Sukkot, and my answer is strictly botanical, I have not engaged in Jewish theology, nor have I addressed the real intention of the question. Embedded in the what question, there is a why question. Yeah, I like that. Various attempts have been offered to set out the parameters of modern Jewish theology and the criteria by which it should be judged. David Blumenthal, for example, suggests that to be a theologian is to speak for Judaism, for God, for humanity, and from within one's prior commitments. Interesting. Byron Sherwin claims that the four criteria that characterize a valid Jewish theology are identical to those of any valid theology. These are authenticity, coherence, contemporaneity, and communal acceptance. Contemporaneity. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just rereading that. There was a lot in that sentence. Okay. So these four components that any kind of theology has these four components within it, be it a Jewish theology or a different theology. Jewish theological work, he argues, should be soaked in Jewish sources and a commitment to Jewish life, couched in comprehensible terms, resonant with contemporary modes of thought, yet not subjugated to their dictates. And it should also find an audience. Okay. Jewish theology, at its most compelling, is an act of testimony. Reflecting on the words of Isaiah 43, you are my witness, declares Adonai, and I am God. An early midrash cites Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai offering a daring reading. When you are my witness, then I am Adonai. But if you are not my witness, I am not Adonai. That's such a powerful statement of our own impact, not just on God, but on what we believe, I guess, right?
Sure. You have to show up.
Yeah. And I guess it's sort of like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, like if nobody's asking these questions, if we're not trying to understand God,
yeah,
then, where is God?
Yeah, and it's all irrelevant at that point.
Okay. Which is sort of the opposite of the Maimonides approach. Like maybe that's the argument for engaging in a theological pursuit, right? That in order to be in relationship with God, we have to question the nature of God.
Hmm. That's very encouraging and empowering.
I think so. Yeah. Not to disagree with Maimonides or anything.
Uh-huh.
To testify to the reality of God is to realize God. So the Midrash would have it. And many who have practiced Jewish theology have sought not only to explain their faith commitments, but to instantiate them through expressing them. Personal testimony will not suffice. Jewish theology should be rooted in learning and curiosity, informed by critical methodology, framed in an engaging way, and offer new insights capable of sparking innovation and action. But in my reading of the biblical child's question, as of every theological prompt since, response calls for personal engagement. Right. So we have to have a blend. Like, we can't just say, I believe this about God because that's what I decided and that's what I believe. Like, we have to root it in some kind of Jewish text, foundation, idea, value.
Yes.
If it's going to be a Jewish theology, right? But the personal is also a critical component of like our personal experience of God is also a critical component to understanding God.
So, like, you need to have a foot in both realms, one in the ancient texts or other Jewish texts of the past, as well as something personal and contemporary to you.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a meeting place of, what has the Jewish experience of God been, and what is my personal experience of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, we really need both of those things together to be able to weigh in to theology Jewishly, I guess.
Yeah, and clearly he's setting up his own justification for why he's going to lay out what his theology is.
Right.
And why it's worthwhile for us to read and engage with his beliefs.
Right. And that some of that is going to be that he's not only going to root it in Jewish text and tradition, but he's also going to be sharing his own personal experience.
Yes.
Or he's come to this through his own personal experience. In the course of this book, I, Michael Marmur, engage in Jewish theology as a responsive testimony to an imagined question by following generations. The question is posed not only in admiration, but also in accusation. In a period of malaise, the inquiry of future generations sounds like, what does this ancient practice have to say to individuals searching for meaning and purpose? At times of crisis, I hear the question as, what is this Judaism you are living, and how can it possibly be equal to the challenges faced by a world of tumult and turmoil? Right? These are like the questions that rabbis are like, this is like what it comes down to so often, I think, in our day and age, for our generation of rabbis, that we're constantly trying to answer this question of why, not just why Judaism is relevant and meaningful, but how it can help us respond or cope with the challenges of our time.
Yes.
And I feel like I'm asking and answering that question daily, like either for myself or for others, or for myself so that I can answer it for others. Right. And yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like Reform Judaism didn't do this very well for a few generations, where we didn't give enough of an answer to the meaning and purpose questions. And I feel like that's maybe one of the reasons people went outside of Judaism to
Yeah.
Buddhism, and to other faith traditions or practices where they found more of a sense of personal meaning and purpose. Because we were maybe a little, I don't know, we had rejected the importance of such questions.
Yeah, I think that's true, certainly of classical Reform Judaism. And if you look at some of the early Reform platforms,
Yes,
they really like de-emphasize the God stuff. And then if you look at later ones, it's like re-emphasized. And um and I definitely remember I remember like growing up and hearing like we don't talk about God enough in Judaism. And then I feel like my experience as a young adult and into rabbinical school and certainly as a rabbi has been very different, that that we've been responding to what we're hearing, the need for these
yes,
questions. And so we do, I think, a much better job now. But I also I guess I have some like contextual compassion for the leaders of classical reform. Like, it was a very different time and people found comfort in different things. And so, you know, classical reform emerges in a time where people find comfort in rationality
yeah, that's
and,
true.
and in knowledge and in science and in advancement, and um some of the sort of spiritual God parts, you know, maybe didn't speak to them. They didn't need it maybe in the same way.
Maybe.
And um, and then I think we start to see that shift after the Holocaust, that the sort of first round of theological questioning in contemporary liberal Judaism is, post-Holocaust theology.
Sure.
And I think that sort of leads us back towards, oh, like there is actually comfort in theological questioning and answering, um, that actually can be comforting after a trauma,
Yeah.
or to
Yeah.
help us, understand the increasingly difficult world that we're living
Yeah.
in.
Especially a return to a personal God who cares about you and who's interested in your life, as opposed to the types of, the images of God where there, was more of a disconnect.
Yeah. And and I think we really are also living in an age where people are so much more motivated by what they feel than what they know to be true, or
Great point.
like truth is so debatable now.
Yeah.
And and so many people are so rooted in like, I'm only going to do this thing if it feels good, or I only believe my own experience, right? and
Right.
and for better for worse, that is a place where theology thrives more, right? Because we are more interested in like, what is the God that we feel, you know
Right.
what is the experience of God, than like, what is the truth of God, or
Hmm.
like, how does God, we're less concerned maybe if God doesn't line up with science, or we're more able to hold rationality in one hand and spirituality in another.
Hmm. What do you think about pausing here before we go on to the next section? And we'll do that next time.
Yeah. Did we finish off this section?
Yeah. We're up to liberal
We did.
theology.
I had zoomed in, but yes, that seems like a perfect place to stop then.
Hmm.
Deep thoughts. This has been so lovely.
Always so wonderful.
I'm going to be thinking a lot about like where theology shows up in my day-to-day life and in my rabbinical work. What are you going to be thinking about? Like, what's your takeaway?
Something similar. How often what people are looking for is a question of what does God say? What does God believe? Where am I within God? And vice versa.
Mm.
And sometimes it's kind of a parental search,
Mm.
like looking for God as a parent. Sometimes it's um, something related to justice or fairness or judgment. Um, and where where can I, as a rabbi, help someone find something comforting in whatever the answer might be?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Good
Well,
stuff.
again, if you are watching along with us, we'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. And
Yes.
also, please subscribe to our YouTube page so that we can build up a following and be able to live stream directly to YouTube, which we'd love to be able to do so that you can be in it with us in the moment. How great would that be? Sending love to all of you out there, wherever
Thank
you
you,
may.
everybody. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.